Well, Springhill here, and welcome back to the Dark Mod New Mappers Workshop. This lesson is going to talk about the basics of getting Dark Radiant set up and what you need to know to create the first room of your mission that you can actually load up and walk around in. Before you can follow along with the steps we're about to go through, you need to make sure that you have Dark Radiant installed and running. If you haven't installed it yet, I'll put a link in the doobly-doo down below that you can follow to the Dark Radiant page and follow the instructions there. So, once Dark Radiant is installed, you need to go to your main Dark Mod folder. You'll see a folder there labeled FMs. Go into that folder, and if you've played a lot of missions like I have, you'll see quite a long list of them there. You're going to make a folder here for your project files. Give it any name you want right now. We can always change it later. I've called mine Workshop. Inside this project folder, we're going to do two things. One, I want you to make a new folder called Maps. And the second thing is to make just a regular text file called Dark Mod Text. And you need to include in it just one line, title, colon, and then just the name you want to use to refer to your mission for now. You can always change this at a later date. Again, I've just used the term workshop. What this will do is allow us to keep all of our project files in one folder. But before we can go further, we have to tell both Dark Radiant and the Dark Mod how to find this folder. We'll start with Dark Radiant first. Once you've made your project folder, open up Dark Radiant, go to Edit, and then Preferences, and then you should see the following screen. You want to set the engine path so that it points directly to your Dark Mod folder, and then set the FS game path to the new folder that you just made. Remember to include the FMs as part of the path. So Dark Radiant will now know where our project files go. Now there's two more things that we need to do before we can start mapping. There are two files that I'd like you to download. One is a prefab archive, which I want you to extract into your main Dark Mod folder. The other one is called Models, and I would like you to extract that into your FM's Workshop folder, or whatever you called your project folder. These are assets that we will be using as we map. So we're now ready to begin using Dark Radiant. So the first thing you're going to have to decide is how you want to set up your working space. Now there's a few different options here. If you go up to View and down to Window Layout, there's different options you can use to set out your different windows. I use the floating method because I like the ability to stretch out some of these windows and resize them while I'm working. But other people prefer the embedded windows. It's really up to you how you want to organize things, and you'll have to basically play around a bit until you see what you like. I recommend having sort of the entity window down here, or at least visible. Doesn't have to be there exactly, but that should be one of the windows that you have open. You should have a camera window open where you can see in the map and actually look around and see what it's going to look like more or less. I like to have two different XY windows, one for a top view where I can quickly see what's going on in the map as a whole, and one that is sort of a side view that I can switch around as needed. So this is just what I prefer, but you will decide what you like and what's most comfortable. So the first thing that we're going to do is start by going to New Map. Deal with that. Okay, so this is what you'll see when you first start it up. Not a whole lot of anything. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do is probably set our grid size. I would say that you want to start with at least an 8, maybe even a 16. 8 is probably good because we're going to be starting to put in some modules. And at this point, you should have already decided now which region of your map you're going to start working on first. I guess I'd recommend that it's an interior region because it will make this first step a little easier. I also like to start with the region where I think my player is going to spend the most time. For me, that's going to be the mansion, and so I'm going to start with a mansion room. Before we do anything else, we're going to start by drawing a simple brush. So left click on the XY window and drag out. It'll create a red rectangle, which is a brush. I've only recently discovered that the dark mod is not happy when the very first thing in your map is not a brush. So we're just going to put this in here just to avoid future errors. Now, the way that I'm going to recommend you map is using prefabs as much as possible. So let's take a look at how to use prefabs. In one of your windows here, the XY windows, you're going to right click, and that brings up this menu. And we are going to go down to Insert Prefab. And that brings up this window here. Now, if you copied the prefab folder that I mentioned a moment ago, then you should see pretty much the same list I've got. There'll be some things down here that you won't have, but you should have architecture, and then you should have these two folders here, module interiors and module buildings. If your starting region is a city street area, then you're going to want to deal with these module buildings. These are facades that you can use to block out city streets. Mostly the Timbro 1 set, but there are a few that are of different sets. If you're doing interiors, you're going to want to start with the model interiors here. There are some mansion pieces, a significant number of them, because I noticed many of you said you wanted to start with a mansion area. And so we have pre-made halls and pre-made rooms that you can drop right into your map just to speed things up a little bit. There are also some industrial areas, quite a lot actually, of industrial areas, some of the regular interior. So this should give you a good place to start. So I'm going to go ahead and drop in just a room, a mansion room, say a 4x3, something large. I use my mouse wheel here to scroll in and out to zoom on these windows here. And if you right click and drag, that's how you can move it around. Okay, this little thing here, by the way, is the camera. It shows you what direction the camera is looking down here. In the camera view, if you click once with the right mouse, then you can sort of free look around. There we are. And you can take a look at what you have just placed, and the mouse wheel will sort of zoom back and forth to navigate. It takes a little getting used to. Okay, so there is the first prefab. We've got a 3x4 room to drop right in here already. These prefabs are a really easy way to get started on your map. So hopefully by now you have some vague idea of how you want your first region to be mapped out. You should know by now, for example, the number of rooms and some sense of what those rooms are going to be. And then you can start deciding how you're going to lay the rooms out and connect them with hallways. You need to keep in mind what we learned last lesson about having corners and choke points to keep your performance in check. But I'm not really going to go into too much detail with you about how to sketch out your layout, because I really don't have a whole lot to offer there. I think it's a pretty individual thing. Some people like to do very detailed sketches. Other people do very, very general, rough sketches. I think I'm kind of in the middle. I sketch things out fairly roughly. I have some idea of how the rooms are going to be placed next to each other, but I also then just adapt as I go. So it's really up to you how specific you want to be. Just keep in mind the room limit that we've established and which rooms you think are important to have for your story, and anything else we can block off with one of the methods we've talked about before. Now, right now, if you notice, I've got this translate box selected over here, and that's why I have these two arrows that let me move to the side or up and down, and there's also one for going in the Z axis. But you can't easily free move this, and sometimes I find that annoying. So if I go down to here, then you can just click on the thing itself with the left mouse and just drag it as you wish. You can free move it. So I'm going to position this about right here. Actually, I'm going to move it up. This is the center of the map here, so this is actually quite a bit lower than center. There's no particular reason not to begin your map near the center, so I'm going to put it right about there. You don't have to worry about too much right now about where we're going to put this. The goal for today is just getting you used to the controls and placing the player inside here somewhere. So you can hit escape to deselect, and now I want you to right click again somewhere inside that room. And we've got this menu again. We'll be using this a lot because this is how you place entities, models, lights, speakers, things like that. But I want you to go down to here, create player start. We're going to click that and then check and make sure that it's inside the room. It's not way below or way above, and that is where the player will begin the map. So for right now, we just want to get this set up so that we can actually go into this map and see what we have placed. So we're just going to put some of the very basic things. Hit escape again to deselect. Now zoom out, and then way off to the side here somewhere, we're going to right click again, and you're going to go to insert prefab. And now we're going to go down to the folder that says Mapper Tools. And I want you to click on Dev Equipment. Hit OK. And that's going to plop a little blue room down here that's going to be full of equipment. If you scroll in, you can see swords and blackjacks and arrows and things like that. So that when we go in to test our map, we will have a full set of developer, or player rather, equipment so we can test things. Before we release our map, we will delete that. Okay, another thing we're going to put in here is a light. So if you go to here, create light, you'll see that we've got this red box here. The center of the light is here. This red box shows how far the light goes. And if you hit L, it brings up the light properties window. There's lots of things you can do with lights. For now, we're just going to keep it really simple. We're just going to make it a little less bright. So right now it's pure white. That's awfully harsh. We're going to leave it pure white in terms of color. Sometimes you'll want lights that are more in the yellow, so they're a bit warmer and they go with the yellow glow of many of our lamps. Sometimes you want pure white, but for now we're going to stick with pure white and just make it a little less bright. So scroll this down a little bit, maybe about halfway, just so it's not quite so bright. And then, oops, actually I didn't mean to hit that. I meant to hit OK. And then exit. And then we just have to make sure that this is inside the room somewhere. Okay. Now one concept that you need to understand to help you map is this concept of the void. Right now when you start a map, there's an infinite amount of space that you can place things in, and that space is called the void. When you are preparing your map to run, there cannot be any entities exposed to the void. That means that all entities have to be surrounded by brushwork. You can think of it a little bit like a submarine underwater. You have to have solid walls between you and the water. It's the same thing here with a void. So even though we have a model room, we need to surround those model walls with brushes to help seal off the void. So here's what we're going to do. I want you to, using the left mouse button, you're going to click and hold down, and you will draw a box around your map, around your room rather, like this, and then let go. Now when you let go, you can see that, wow, this is quite a bit taller than we need it to be around that room. As long as the brush is selected, when you left click outside it, you can move the edges. You see that blue dot? That means you can now drag it. You're going to resize. If I click up here, blue dot appears. I can drag that down, resize it. If I click inside the box, I move it. If you click and drag inside the box, you move the box. Click outside and you resize the box. So we have our brush outlined here in red. You can see that this says at the moment shader not found because we have not given this a texture. So we're going to do that now. We do that by going over here to the Media tab and click on Textures. The majority of the textures are under Dark Mod, and because we're going to be dealing with a mansion interior, we're going to give it some kind of wood texture. Now you might ask, why not just cover it in caulk? If those people who know a little bit about brushes and texturing might prefer to put caulk around the outside. I'm not going to do that because caulk does not cast shadows, and these modules, for the most part, these models do not have a back to them. You can see through them. Now, I can't really show you right now. Okay. You can see that there's some textures on the back, but there's also gaps. And so if there's a light over here, it could, if this was caulk, the light could go right through this and into the room, which we don't want. So I'm going to surround this just with wood. And it doesn't really matter what wood we're using. You right-click on the texture that you want. You can preview them here. Right-click and then apply to texture. And now you can see that our large brush here is covered with wood. Oh, that's right. Right now, it's a single brush, and so when we go inside the brush, we're actually just looking right through it to the outside. It's only textured on the side that's facing us, which is a problem. So here's what we need to do. There's two buttons over here. One is called Hollow and one is called Make a Room. I'm going to use Hollow. I'll show you the difference. If we click this, you can see that now this has taken the room, or taken the brush rather, and made it into a hollow box. The difference between the two is that here the brushes overlap. They overlap on the corner, and if you were to use Make Room, they would not overlap. I like to use Hollow. I like to have them overlapping for ceiling brushwork because here, when they don't overlap, they're just touching right at this point, and if you accidentally move something, it's pretty easy to create a gap there. So I'm going to stick with Hollow. And now if we go inside, using the mouse wheel to scroll, you can see that we now can see the brush on the floor, and we can see the brush on the ceiling. If you notice, it's awfully repetitive. So we're going to click on the floor and the ceiling because that's what we'll see for the most part. And if you hit the S key, you get the Surface Inspector window. And we're going to go down here and hit the Natural button and watch what happens. We hit it, see how it expands the texture and makes it look a little more natural. When you hit the Natural button, what you're doing is actually applying this default scale. You could also hit Fit, which means that it stretches the texture to fit the brush, but that's going to be too big for most textures. So right now we're just going to go with the Natural. And now you can see we've got a floor and we've got a ceiling. Now, we're not actually going to keep those for the floor and ceiling. This is our ceiling brush. This now makes sure that we don't have any gaps to the outside. I don't like to use the ceiling brushwork as my floor because sometimes I like to cut the floor up and do decorative things with it, and you really don't want to cut up the ceiling brushwork. That's not a good idea. It's a way that you can open leaks. So I'm going to draw another brush in here. Click with the right mouse button and draw. Oops. I'm going to draw a brush that is going to become our floor. Now if you look, if I zoom in here, you can see that this actually goes higher than the model, and I don't really want to cut off there. I can't make this any smaller because on a grid of 8, this is 1 square. So I'm going to lower my grid down to maybe 2. See how now there's a lot more boxes. I'm going to right click above, so I've got that blue dot showing up, and drag down, and now that's a lot closer to the bottom. So I'm going to keep that there. I'm going to put this back to 8 for the work we're going to do later, but now this fits nicely. So now I have to decide what texture do I want my floor to be. So I'm going to, actually I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. I'm just going to throw a texture down that looks good. Again, S, natural, and there. So that's kind of a nice mansion looking floor. The ceiling I'm not going to bother with for now for reasons we will explain later, but I will put a texture on it. Let's do a panel. And, well, that's maybe a little too ornate. Maybe we can find something there. That looks good. How about a walnut version of that? Apply to selection, and then how's that scale? Actually, I don't mind that scale. I'm going to leave it like that. Okay, so now we have, at least in Dark Radiant here, a room. We have a player start. We've completely sealed it, which means there's no leaks to the outside, no leaks to the void. We have our floor brush, and we have a light. There's one more thing we're going to put in here, and this is something I usually put in right away for scale, and that's an AI. So we're going to go to Create Entity, and we're going to go to oh, this is interesting. This is different than the setup I'm used to. It's got it organized by PK4. Okay, well, let's go to AI, we'll go to Builders, and we'll go to Armed, and we'll just put a Builder Guard in here. Sometimes in the preview window they look a little weird and twisted, but they're okay in game. Close that. Scroll out just to make sure that he's in the right spot. You can have these guys floating above the floor a little bit. They will fall down when the game starts, so you don't have to worry about positioning them exactly. But don't put them way up high, or sometimes it won't calculate the pathfinding that's needed. So okay, we've got him in there, but we don't want him to attack us when we start. So we're going to go to Entity, and we're going to add something here. We're going to put Team 0. So he will be on the same team as the player. And the reason I like to throw an AI in there is just for scale, because sometimes it can be hard to figure out how tall the rooms are and how big they are. Okay, so we have an AI, we have our walls. Let's do one more thing. We're going to put a piece of furniture in here. So we're going to right click again. We're going to go to Create Model. And most of them are in dark mod, and you can go through. We're going to go to furniture, seating, and you can start looking at the different models. Now in the preview window here, if you left click and hold it, you can rotate the model around to see it. If you right click, it spins from some weird axis, which isn't very useful. So click, hold, and spin. If you see a little arrow next to the model, that means there are skins available, so you can check and see if there's a color you prefer. Let's put a green one in here just for the heck of it. And now we have our chair. Now the chair is not facing the way that we want it to. Right now it's facing the wall. So there's a couple ways you can deal with this. The easiest way is to use these rotate commands up here, and the most common one is this Z-axis. So if we click that, you notice that it rotates in 90-degree increments. And sometimes that's all you need. If you want to do more fine-tuning, you can hit R, which gives you these circles around the object. And if you click on one of them and drag, you can do sort of fine rotation. And then you hit R again to clear that. Also, if we, where can we see the chair? There it is. Also, the chair is floating in space right now, which is annoying. There is a button over here called Floor, and what that does is it moves the model straight down until it hits something. And the first thing it's going to hit for us is the floor. So we just click that, it goes right down to the floor, and then you don't have to worry about trying to make sure that there's no gaps and that the object's not floating. It's a really easy and convenient tool to use. So hit Escape to clear the selection. So now we have a room with an AI and we have a room with a chair, and there's a light in it. And really that's enough to save this and go in and check out what it looks like. So I've already saved mine before. I think when you save yours for the first time, oops, you'll have to call it something. Not copy yet. Save as. Now you want to make sure that you're saving it in the project folder you made. Mine's called Workshop, and under that we made Maps. So you want to make sure you're in that Maps folder. call it something, don't give it a very long name because we will be typing this a lot. So I've just called mine Mansion 1. And I usually put numbers after them because I regularly change the numbers as we go so that I have multiple versions of the map. In case something goes wrong, you can back up to an earlier version to check out the problem. So right now I'm just calling it Man1. You can save yours to whatever name you wish. Okay, once we've done that, we are now ready to go into the dark mod itself. So we have to tell the dark mod where our project files are. So you're going to start up the dark mod and go to New Missions, and then scroll down until you get to the name that you gave to your project file, whatever you put in as title in dark mod text. For me, that was Workshop, so I scroll down to where Workshop is, click on that, and then go to Install Mission. When the dark mod starts up, you should see your title listed on the menu there. So pull up the console by hitting Control, Alt, and the tilde key, and we're going to type in DMAP and then the name of your mission. And this will get the engine to create some necessary collision files and other things that the map needs to run. If there are any leaks in your map, this is the point where they would show up as errors and the map would fail to DMAP. Hopefully that's not the case, but I will show you what to do if that does happen in a few moments. So if your DMAP was successful, just remove the D and put map and then your name, and your mission will load. And then you will be dropped into your very own room that you've created. So you see that there's light and shadow here. We've got a chair, we've got a guard there in the corner. You can move around and test the light levels in your map. Everything is working as you would want it to, except, of course, the guard's on your team, so he's not going to attack you. Now, there's one thing that you might notice that looks a little off, and that's the shadows in here. If you look at the shadows of that guard or the shadows of the chair there, you can see that they are pitch black. You cannot see any details in there whatsoever. That's because we're missing something called an ambient world light. And that's something that we will add in the next step. But otherwise, you have now completed your very first room. You've created an environment that you can move around in. I like to get this set up right away because it allows you to then start testing the changes that you make in real time. So you can add some rooms and you can then test them out right away and see how they're going to look in the game. So it's possible when you demap your mission that you will get an error message saying that it leaked. That means that there's an entity in your map that is exposed somehow to the void. If that happens to you, you can exit from the dark mod, open Dark Radiant, and you need to go to the option that says Point File. And what that will do is draw a red line directly from some entity in your map to a void. So that chair has access or has a direct line to the void, which is a problem. So to check where that hole is, where that access to the void is, I would go to Filters and turn off all entities because generally speaking, since entities don't seal the map, they usually just get in the way. Then you can free look around, you see that red line, and follow it until you find out where the gap is. Sometimes you'll just open gaps accidentally because you selected something without realizing it, moved a brush slightly, and those are fairly easy to fix. Sometimes though, you might find that the red line starts in the void and doesn't seem to touch anything, and that can be confusing. One thing to check is to make sure that you don't have a filter on that is actually filtering off something that's floating out there in the void. But it's possible that the origin of a model, even though the model is inside brushes, the origin is not. You can see that this wall, I've rotated it just to get this effect, but by rotating it like that, the origin is actually out in the void, and that causes a leak. So you can either fix that by moving the model, or you can make the sealing brush thicker. As long as the origin is inside a brush, then the map will demap properly. So those are the absolute basics, but they are the complete basics of how you will map out a mission. You create the room facade, or the things that the player will actually see, generally using modules or something called func statics, which we'll talk about later. You then surround the room with ceiling brushes to keep it separate from the void. And then it's just a matter of customizing and adding things to it. And then thinking about entry points, and then you just continue to repeat that step by step. This is also the case for outdoor areas too, like courtyards in the middle of a city. The courtyard is just a room with facades around the edge, which would be buildings, and brushes that seal it around the outside of that. Now the brushes in an outdoor setting would probably be skybox brushes, which show a night sky, and we'll look at how to set them up in a later video. But the general concept is the same. It's a facade with a brush box around it. So the next video that we're going to do is going to look at how to create entry points, entry and exit points from your rooms and connect them using tunnels. And we'll also start going into some of these things in more details, like how to use ambient world lights, how to add entities to your map, and things like that. But this will get you started. You can create your first room. You can run around in it. If you run into any problems, just post in the forums and I will help you out. And until the next video, happy mapping.
It's over now, villain.